The humans they erased from history, the Neanderthals of Ice Age Europe. The spear misses, not by much, maybe 2 fingers of air between the flint tip and the woolly rhinoceros's flank. The animal wheels, for tons of muscle and prehistoric fury pivoting on hooves the size of anvils. And the hunter, I'll call him Rek, because he deserves a name, not a specimen number. Rek plants his feet in 6 inches of sucking permafrost mud and does not run. That is the first thing you need to understand. These were not creatures who ran. I have spent 31 years crawling through the limestone guts of Europe. Dordogne, the Altai, the karst ridges above the Neander Valley itself, where a quarry worker in 1856 tossed a skullcap down to a geology teacher named Fulrot and accidentally detonated one of the longest arguments in the history of science. I have touched the bones. I have held a Neanderthal femur in my bare hands. You are not supposed to do that anymore. Gloves and protocols and understandable, yes, but I have done it, and I want to tell you something that no museum placard will ever say out loud. These people were not failed humans. They were a completed one, and we erased them, not just from the earth, from the story we tell about ourselves. Let me back up. Let me set the stage because the stage matters enormously. Europe, somewhere between 140,000 and 40,000 years ago, is not the tidy continent of river cruises and cobblestones. It is a pressure cooker running in reverse. The climate lurches between extremes with no warning and no mercy. A warm interglacial period can collapse into glacial cold within a human lifetime. The trilene retreats hundreds of kilometers in a single generation. Forests that sheltered aurochs and straight-tusked elephants simply vanish, replaced by open-steppe tundra so vast and windswept that the horizon looks like the edge of the world, because for every practical purpose it is. The wind off the glaciers carries a particular smell. I know this because I have stood on the Rhone Glacier in January with nothing between me and the ice field but a fleece I deeply regretted not upgrading. It smells like iron and old stone and an absence of anything living. Multiply that by a factor that language cannot hold. Now put a family of 8 in it, with nothing but the animals they can kill, the plants they can find, and whatever fire they manage to keep alive in a limestone shelter where the back wall seeps water 10 months of the year. That is the world Rek lived in. That is the world where Neanderthals did not merely survive. They thrived for roughly 300,000 years. For context, anatomically modern Homo sapiens have been doing our version of civilization for perhaps 300 centuries. They ran their marathon 10 times longer than we have run ours. And we call them primitive. The fossils don't tell us everything, but my gut says the arrogance there is ours, not theirs. Look at the skeleton from Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, Shanidar 1, catalogued with clinical detachment, nicknamed Nandy by Ralph Seletsky, the archaeologist who found him in the 1950s. Nandy's right arm had been amputated or had withered early in life. His left eye socket shows trauma that likely left him partially or fully blind on that side. He had severe arthritis. He was between 40 and 50 years old when he died, which for a Neanderthal in that world is not old, it is ancient. It is ancient the way a 100-year-old soldier is ancient. Every single day past 30 was a negotiation with the cold and the hunger and the bone-deep grind of a body that had absorbed decades of violent physical work. He did not survive alone. He could not have. Someone fed him when the arm failed. Someone shared the fire. Someone, over years, regarded this damaged, half-blind man as worth keeping alive. You want to talk about humanity? You want to draw the bright line between us and them? There it is. Draw it around Nandy and see which side of it you think you land on. Now let me talk about tools, because this is where I get genuinely angry on their behalf. The word Mousterian gets thrown around in the textbooks like it means simple. The Mousterian toolkit, the dominant technology of Neanderthal culture, gets treated as a static, primitive thing, a caveman starter pack. This is wrong in ways that should embarrass anyone who has actually tried to nap flint. I mean that literally. Go pick up a nodule of good flint, take a hammerstone, and try to produce what the Neanderthals produced routinely. The Levallois technique. I am going to describe this carefully because if you actually understand it, the brute narrative falls apart completely. You start with a nodule of flint. Before you strike a single usable flake, you spend time, significant time, shaping the core. You remove preparatory flakes around the perimeter to create a domed, tortoiseshell surface. You are not reacting. You are planning. You are building a three-dimensional mental map of the stone and calculating how force will propagate through it before a single tool exists. Then, with one controlled strike to a prepared platform at the edge, you detach a flake of predetermined shape, predetermined thickness, predetermined edge angle. You have, in effect, designed the tool before you made it. The cognitive load of Levallois is not trivial. Experimental archaeologists have documented that novice knappers, modern humans with access to instructional materials and demonstration, take months to produce Levallois flakes of consistent quality. Neanderthal children grew up doing this. It was their language of material culture, encoded across generations through observation and practice, and yes, I will say the word, teaching. And then there is Abri Peyroni, a Neanderthal site in the Dordogne, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, where researchers found something called lissoirs, bone tools, specifically ribs from large ungulates shaped and burnished into smooth, spatula-like implements used for working hides, making leather supple. The lissoir is not a flint-bashing implement. It requires understanding material properties, that wet hide responds differently than dry, that sustained pressure along the grain achieves what percussion cannot. It requires patience. It requires technique passed between hands over time. Here is the sting. Lissoirs appear in Neanderthal sites before they appear in early modern human sites in the same region. If there was borrowing happening, the arrow of influence points in a direction the old textbooks never wanted to acknowledge. Go further back, much further. 337,000 years ago, on the shores of a lake in what is now Lower Saxony, near the German town of Schöningen, a group of Neanderthals, or their immediate predecessors, left behind 8 wooden throwing spears. The Schöningen spears. They are between 1.8 and 2.5 meters long, carved from spruce and pine, shaped with a point at both ends and a center of gravity positioned exactly as a modern athletic javelin is positioned, 1/3 from the front tip. They are not digging sticks. They are not prodding tools. They are aerodynamic weapons, engineered through trial and error and accumulated knowledge, representing a tradition of woodworking so sophisticated that the trees were selected based on the specific density and grain of the wood. Wood does not preserve. Think about that. Think about how much has rotted away. The Schöningen spears survived by accident, preserved in waterlogged sediment. For every set of spears that made it to us, how many thousands rotted into the earth? What other tools crafted from organic materials simply ceased to exist? We are reconstructing a people from the hardest, most durable fraction of their material lives. We are judging the whole library by the books that survived a flood. The fossils don't tell us everything. My gut says we are barely seeing the shadow of what they built. Let me tell you about the pregnant hunter. At the site of La Pharisee in the Dordogne again, which is practically Neanderthal central, skeletal remains were found that included females whose bone structure indicates they were performing the same high-impact physical activities as males. The wear patterns on teeth, the healed fractures, the musculoskeletal stress markers on the arms and shoulders. These are not the marks of a species with rigid divisions between who hunted and who stayed behind. The isotope analysis from various sites suggests that Neanderthal groups were small, kin-based, and that survival demanded flexible roles. When a group numbers 12 and the mammoth is 3 days away, you do not bench half your people. I find it difficult not to think about her. She is somewhere in the second trimester, probably. Her back aches in ways she has learned to ignore. She holds a spear she has used before. Its haft worn smooth where her grip settles. A groove her hand recognizes the way you recognize a door handle in the dark. The group moves through a valley between two ice sheets, and the cold is the kind that makes your teeth ache even when your mouth is closed. She is not a symbol. She is a person in the middle of an ordinary, extraordinary day. We took her name when we assigned her a number. Now I want to address something directly, because you have heard the argument your whole life and it deserves a real answer. Why did they disappear? The comfortable version is that modern Homo sapiens simply outcompete them. Better tools, symbolic thinking, language, social networks, we out-innovated them and they faded. This version is comfortable because it places us on top without requiring us to confront anything ugly. Standard archaeology leans on this. There is no shortage of papers using words like cognitive modernity as a euphemism for what is essentially a just-so story about why we won. But if you have ever spent real time with the evidence, the edges fray. The overlap period, the time when Neanderthals and incoming modern humans shared European territory, lasted somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years, depending on the site and the dating method. That is not a brief encounter. That is generations of co-presence. What happened in those generations is genuinely contested, and anyone who tells you with full confidence is either selling something or has not read the papers that challenge their preferred model. Climate instability spiked hard in the period between 45,000 and 40,000 years ago. Multiple rapid oscillations, cold snaps severe enough to fragment habitat and collapse the prey populations that Neanderthal hunting strategies were tuned to. They were specialists. Specialists are vulnerable to disruption in ways that generalists are not. And disease. We never talk about disease enough. Modern human populations moving out of Africa likely carried pathogens against which they had some acquired immunity through long exposure. Neanderthals had none. The archaeological record cannot show us viruses. It cannot show us the fevers, the hemorrhages, the inexplicable deaths of children who were well yesterday. The fossils don't tell us everything, but if you have read anything about what happened to isolated populations when they first contacted disease-carrying outsiders in historical times, you do not need the fossils to complete the thought. What we know, with the confidence that only genetic sequencing can provide, is this: they did not fully disappear. The work from Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute, work that earned a Nobel Prize in 2022 and should have earned a decade of public reckoning with how we talk about human history, established definitively that modern humans of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some populations higher. East Asian populations show slightly elevated percentages in some studies. The introgression, the technical word for what was, let us be honest, sex between people who recognized each other as people, happened multiple times at multiple points of contact. Some of that inherited DNA is neutral. Some of it is not. Immune system variants. Genes involved in skin and hair adaptation to cold climates. Variants that affect how our blood clots. The Neanderthals, in their deep familiarity with cold and darkness and the specific biological challenges of Ice Age Europe, had already solved problems that our ancestors arriving from warmer latitudes had not yet faced. And they gave us the answers, encoded in a language older than any human tongue. Here is where I arrive after 3 decades of mud and limestone and long arguments over bad wine in field camps. We did not replace the Neanderthals. We absorbed them, imperfectly, brutally, in ways we will never fully reconstruct. They lost, but they did not vanish. They dissolved into us, and what they were, the cold-toughened, flint-clever, bear-burying, hide-working, child-feeding, spear-throwing beings who held on for 300,000 years in conditions that would kill most of us in a week. Some fraction of that still moves through the world in the bodies of the people reading this. Rec is still here. The elder with the healed femur. I have seen that femur, or one like it, in a museum case in Paris, and I stood in front of it for a long time. That elder is still here. The pregnant hunter with the worn spear shaft is still here. The next time someone calls them primitive, I want you to think about Nandi. Think about the 40 or 50 years he lived, the people who kept him alive, the fire they shared in the damp dark. Think about the child who watched a parent shape a spear point from flint at Skaaningen and understood, in whatever language existed inside that skull, that the angle had to be exactly right or the shaft would snap at the wrong moment and the animal would be gone and the group would be hungry, and being hungry in the cold is how you stop being alive. They were not a dead end. They were a road that merged. We carry them in our veins, and we name them brutes, and I will spend whatever years I have left arguing against that. Not from sentimentality, not from romance, from the evidence, from the bone and the stone and the wood that somehow survived 300,000 years to tell us who they were. They were people, and they deserve the word.